The life of Ramon Navarro was bookended by immense stardom on one end, and then, in his very last breaths, immense tragedy. In 1968, the secret that Ramon Navarro tried so desperately to hide throughout his career came out in one infamous, violent act. After that Bloody Wednesday, the legacy of this Latin lover was never the same. In many ways, Navarro's beginnings were steeped in tragedy. Born José Samaniego on February 6, 1899 in Mexico, his family were wealthy doctors and dentists. And there was even a legend they were descended from Mexican royalty. A huge family of 12 children, they lived on an enormous family estate they called the Garden of Eden. Before Navarro had turned 18, he was already set on being a heartthrob. While in Los Angeles, he befriended famed Hollywood power couple Rex Ingram and his wife Alice Terry, who both saw good old dollar signs in the young man's sweet, serene face. Before they started promoting him, however, they asked him to make one big change. Ingram and Terry didn't think the soon-to-be star's birth name of José Samaniego was going to fly, and pressured the teen to change it to a more silver screen-friendly name. Even that didn't go to plan. According to legend, he chose Navarro after his friend Gabriel Navarro, but after a typing error ended up with Ramon Navarro. Either way, the rest was history. Besides his new name change, Ramon Navarro had one more Hollywood strategy up his sleeve. At the time, Rudolph Valentino was the king of Hollywood and the prince of most women's hearts. But Ingram and Terry cleverly positioned their protege as competition for the so-called Latin lover. Yet even though these elder stars helped Navarro immensely, their relationship had a dark side. Ingram believed Navarro could be a star, but he was also shamelessly using him. The director had actually worked with Rudolph Valentino first, but found him too difficult, and he was hoping the naive Navarro would prove easier to control. When Ingram promoted his newest male ingenue, he forced Navarro to take up Rudolph Valentino's mannerisms and his physical traits, down to the very last creepy detail. When Navarro took publicity shots, Ingram even made him comb his hair in the exact same way that the Italian heartthrob did. Though as we'll see, Navarro's rumored connection to Valentino only got more eerie as time went on. When Ben-Hur came out, it was more than an instant sensation. It was also an instant controversy, and Navarro was right at the center. As the wealthy, glamorous Jewish prince Ben-Hur, Navarro wore a series of tight, shiny, and short costumes, setting his female fans' nerves once more and firmly cementing his hunk status. But behind the scenes, things were much less glamorous. Despite his legions of straight female fans, Ramon Navarro was bound to disappoint them, and vice versa. The Mexican heartthrob was actually thoroughly homosexual, even as he desperately tried to conceal this fact from the public eye, keeping his private life intensely private. Though behind the scenes, Navarro's love life was running wild. Just before he gained international superstardom, Navarro took up with the composer Harry Partch, staying with him through the early 1920s. But he soon dealt his lover a heartbreaking betrayal. Whether stardom went to his head or he was afraid of exposure, Navarro dropped Partch immediately as soon as he became famous. Hollywood wasn't ready to accept a gay leading man, but more tragically, Navarro could barely accept himself. His family raised him as a staunch Roman Catholic, and he could never shake the feeling that what he was doing was a sin. This persistent belief affected him deeply, and Navarro eventually developed a raging alcohol problem that many trace back to his sexuality. Later in life, this would catch up to him in a big way. In 1924, Navarro met photoplay celebrity journalist Herbert Howe and quickly started a torrid affair with the newswriter. Together, they hid in plain sight. Hal would write about Navarro in his columns as his closest friend, which only those in the know understood as code for lover, all while Navarro's profile got a boost. But they got more ingenious than that. As long as Navarro was private about his lovers, the studios let him do whatever he wanted. In fact, they helped him create smokescreens, feeding news to the press that he was going on dates with starlets, without ever actually making him meet the woman. The best part? Herbert Howe, his real paramour, was the one writing these false stories. It seemed like a match made in heaven, but the couple was doomed to a bitter end. In 1928, after nearly half a decade together, Howe and Navarro broke up, sending shockwaves through subterranean Hollywood. Well, it must have been a shock for Howe too, because he immediately took to his column and penned a revenge article about his ex Navarro. In his article, Howe accused Navarro of nothing less than cruelty and coldness, claiming he was incapable of showing any inner life or warmth in a relationship, and suggesting he very likely had no inner life at all. Concentrating all his skill for wordplay on obliterating his ex-boyfriend, Howe scathingly wrote that, off-screen, he is a theater with the lights out. Navarro went on to star in the film Laughing Boy, opposite the Mexican Spitfire Lupe Velez, but neither actor brought passion to the screen. The fact that the two Mexican stars were playing Navajo people is cringeworthy in the first place, but critiques at the time also took aim at Navarro's embarrassingly bad wig and aging face. Audiences felt the same, and the film flopped, and Navarro's nightmare was just beginning. A year after Laughing Boy made Navarro a laughingstock on the Hollywood scene, his studio pulled him into a meeting he'd never recover from. In 1935, infamous Hollywood fixer Eddie Mannix asked to see him, then told Navarro he was washed up, costing the studio money, and that they would pay him $19,000 to break his contract and never return. Humiliated, Navarro nonetheless accepted, and it was a steep downhill from there. In the wake of all this personal tragedy, Navarro actually moved back in with his huge family in the mansion he had bought for them. Film historians think he likely suffered a nervous breakdown around this time. So much so that he brought his current boyfriend with him, exposing his extremely traditional family to his hidden preferences for the very first time. Ramon Navarro was always a fighter, and after his breakdown, he tried his hardest to make a comeback, but it went horrifically. He went to London to perform a stage version of his movie, The Prisoner of Zenda, but when the crowd glimpsed him, they were shocked to see the former heartthrob had let himself go to seed. Ramon Navarro's less than camera-ready body wasn't just the result of a life spent out of the spotlight. It was also a dark symptom of his inner demons. In his years away from Hollywood, his drinking problem had swollen to epic proportions, and he now often drove around bleary-eyed and recklessly. This had devastating consequences. Starting in the 1950s, Navarro began to pay men to sleep with him to fulfill his needs, and developed a network of men around Los Angeles. Sadly though, this habit also fueled his drinking and his driving. Every time he used the sinful services, the guilty star would take liquid courage and drive around town before calling the hustlers up, leading to his many infractions. Over the years, Navarro's mental anguish grew and grew. In 1962, Ramon Navarro was still up to his old habits and crashed his car while driving around drunk. This time, however, he seemed on the verge of sanity when the officers detained him, and one of the men claimed the actor turned to him and said, "I am old and I just want to die." Navarro later denied saying any such thing, but he would tragically get his wish. During the final years of his brief life, the former matinee idol spent the little money he had on the services of male escorts. One of Navarro's favorite technicians was a young man named Larry Ortega, a longtime contact who Navarro would often pay with coded checks that referenced gardening or, more pointedly, massage. For a while, Ortega and his larger network kept Navarro satisfied and safe. Until, that is, the fateful day the star was left cold on a bed, choking in his own blood. On the eve of Halloween 1968, Ramon Navarro received a phone call from an escort who claimed he got the star's number from Larry Ortega and asked Navarro if he wanted his services that night. Trusting his long-term network, Navarro invited the man over to his home. When two men showed up, brothers by the name of Paul and Tom Ferguson, he invited both in anyway. It would be his doom. The Ferguson brothers were painfully young. Paul was just 22 and Tom 17. The next and final moments of Ramon Navarro's life are mysterious even as they are infamous. Both brothers told different stories. According to Paul's vague and abstract testimony, he fell asleep during their visit, only to wake up to Tom informing him Navarro was dead. However, Tom tells a much more sinister and detailed tale. According to Tom, he entered the bedroom and saw that Paul had Navarro on the bed. He then watched as his brother bludgeoned Navarro with a prop cane and demanded a large sum of money he thought the star had. By the time Tom went to the bathroom and came back, Navarro's life had dwindled to nothing. Whatever the truth, Ramon Navarro was dead, but Tom and Paul weren't finished. After doing the deed, the Ferguson brothers had to cover it up, and they went to great lengths to mask the scent of their trail. Paul and Tom proceeded to make it look like either a female sex worker or Larry Ortega himself had been the one to take Navarro's life, putting a rubber in his hand while also writing Ortega's name on a bedsheet and in a notepad. As for that stash of money Paul claimed Ramon Navarro had, it was non-existent. In the end, the Fergusons left Navarro's house that night with a measly $20 bill they had found in his housecoat pocket. By the time the authorities got there, the former star's body was in bad shape. He had bruises from head to toe, and officers even found his broken tooth lying on the floor. Eventually, they determined the cause of his demise was asphyxiation. But this led to the most infamous rumor of all. For years in Hollywood, whispers persisted that when Ramon Navarro met his mortifying end, he hadn't choked on his own blood, but on an embarrassing bedroom toy. According to Hollywood Babylon, the fatal adult toy had once belonged to Navarro's professional nemesis Rudolph Valentino, who had gifted it to the star and engraved the instrument with his initials. Anger even went so far as to claim that Navarro had a shrine to Valentino in his house, and that the toy was the centerpiece of his worship. The truth, however, is much different. In reality, Navarro's end was actually more scandalous than this. When authorities nabbed both brothers and the case hit the newspapers, Navarro's sexuality was suddenly on display for the entire world. Not only were his fans heartbroken, but his public image also fell apart instantly. As for the trial itself, in many ways, Navarro's trial was the first chime of the death toll for old Hollywood. Taking place just weeks before the Manson murders, it became symbolic of the end of the free love of the 1960s as much it was the end of Navarro's carefully constructed private life. Yet in the end, he got justice. The court convicted both brothers, and decades later, Paul finally confessed to the act. Ramon Navarro's tragic tale, a matinee idol with a ruinous secret, a gruesome end on the eve of Halloween, a symbolic trial heralding the end of Hollywood, had fascinated writers for decades, from Joan Didion to Charles Bukowski. Yet despite the Bloody Wednesday that ended his life, Navarro's film work continues to speak for itself.